Hello, welcome to this webinar. I'm Francis Seeley from GlobalNet 21, and this is one of the many webinars we do where we look at big issues. And today we're going to look at one issue around sustainability, around areas where we look at sustainability, particularly in the urban areas. And we have Alice Roberts with us, who's from the Campaign for the Protection of Rural England. And you may wonder, what has that got to do with urban areas? Well, she's going to tell us about that today. And she's going to do it, first of all, in a presentation, so you can see the sort of concerns they have, and they're concerns that affect us all. So we'll go to the presentation first, and then we'll interview Alice afterwards with some other questions. So let's look at what Alice has to say.
I'm the head of campaigns at CPRE London, so I work on mainly on protection of green spaces, which includes green belts, but that extends to policy on transport and parking and cars because of the amount of space that's given over to that, and because we spend a lot of time trying to persuade people and the powers that be that it's better not to build on green space and to use space which is the huge amount of space which is given over to grey space, which we would call cars and parking and roads and car-related infrastructure and just poorly used space as well. So that's the link between green space, housing and transport, and hopefully that will become more clear as I go on. So this is a picture of my parklet outside my house. So my council, Hackney Council, gave me permission to take one parking space and put a little parklet in it instead, and that's just one small way that we can demonstrate the links between transport and carbon emissions and better urban realm. So just wanted to say quickly what we've been doing in Enfield. So we worked on a big project in Enfield some time ago called Space to Build, which was with the Enfield Society and Enfield Road Watch. And that was about finding space to build with a view to avoiding the council building or proposing to build on green belt. So that was up here, you can see. More recently, in May 2018, we did a report about traffic, the impact of traffic noise on green spaces and parks in London, and Enfield came out as the worst affected, with over half of its green spaces severely impacted by traffic noise. And so that was that report that you can see there. More recently, we did a report on London's green belt and why it's our climate safety belt, and that's of relevance to Enfield, of course, because of the proposals to potentially build on Enfield's green belt. And then just literally this week, I've spoken to a man called Matt Byrne, who's concerned about the green space provision around the new Meridian water development, and we're talking about perhaps having something to do with our 10 New Parks campaign for London, so creating a new park and giving it a new identity, and that's that map that I've put in there. So more generally, we've got the Go Parks London project and the Healthy Streets Scorecard project, and I wanted to talk to you about those. So Healthy Streets, to start with, is a big coalition of a very large number of different groups. We're all campaigning for different things: reducing air pollution, improving road safety, encouraging active travel, improving our public realm, or reducing carbon emissions. But we've realised that the solutions are all the same, and so all of our partners have agreed that we will campaign on these measures collectively, and these are 5 things. One is borough-wide low traffic neighbourhoods, and I'll come on to what those are. Default 20-mile-per-hour speed limit, borough-wide controlled parking zones, protected cycle lanes on main roads, and traffic-free streets around all schools. So we gave the Healthy Streets Scorecard gives, which is a website you can find by searching Healthy Streets Scorecard, which gives lots of detail on Enfield's, on how Enfield's done. But Enfield doesn't score well. It scores pretty low, and we need it to do a lot, and we need a lot more action in Enfield to have an impact in all these areas. So controlled parking zones, we're trying to focus on what the benefits are, but basically they reduce commuter trips and reduce what's called switchable trips, which are those which could easily be made by public transport, walking and cycling. Enfield has a very, very low rate of controlled parking, and that really does need to change to impact on those two things in particular. So here's an example, a nice picture of where there was controlled parking in somewhere near where I live in Hackney, and it's also relatively near to a train station, so you can see that people were clearly parking and commuting, because once they put it in, there were no cars left. Low traffic neighbourhoods, so this is where you put bollards in the street to stop through traffic going through residential areas. So that's a couple of pictures. 20-mile-per-hour zones speak for themselves. Protected cycle track is very important, because so many people are put off cycling by not having safe routes, so safe cycle track, and it's no good having just a bit of paint on the road. That doesn't encourage people to cycle. This is a school street, so where cars are removed from drop-off and pick-up times from that street. Some boroughs are going for all schools, all primary schools. So yeah, so we're really keen to push that one. So that's the Healthy Street Scorecard, the 5 key things that we really need local campaigners to be promoting. So anyone out there who can help, we really want you to help. But they're not the only actions we're promoting. There are, of course, a whole load of other things which are incredibly important. For example, action on crossings and junctions are really important too. They're just not our top 5, as it were. For CPRE London, one of the incredibly important things that we're promoting is that local plans must promote a shift away from car-dependent retail and enable car-free housing development where you're not allowed to get a car parking permit. So what we want to see is a reduction of this type of thing, where you see huge surface car park with very poor use of space, this kind of thing. And this, of course, is the A10, the proposed development of the Colosseum Retail Park in the A10, which would replace a big box retail park with very large surface car park. So that's an example of what the kind of thing that we would be promoting, and which we do support, in support of all of the things that I've talked about, and low carbon lifestyles as well. So moving on to Go Parks London, we have a big campaign called Go Parks London, which is a website as well, which is a map, and this is about encouraging people to spend more time in their parks, and particularly those people who might not be gaining the benefits from being in parks. And we want to do more work locally with the boroughs, or within the boroughs, with local groups. So we want to, so we're hoping to run a campaign in Enfield called Go Parks Enfield, which would be working with a number of local groups to have an event, a day event, when we create a route around the parks and either walk or cycle that route and encourage other people to do that. So Go Parks London is our map. This is a picture of it. We're very keen to have park friends groups create listings on our map so that people can see what's happening in those parks. And our Enfield friends groups have done incredibly well, and I think have the most of any borough now. So that's wonderful. Thank you. Well done. You can find that at goparks.london. And yeah, so I said we're trying to work on a fun day for everybody, a kind of Discover Enfield Parks event. So that would involve finding a date, a route, doing promotion and having a bit of a presence on the day. We're in the very early stages, so we haven't got further than that, but we're really keen to hear from anybody who's interested in getting involved with that. And as I said, the main aim is to encourage more people to discover parks, to walk and cycle, and find out more about what their local groups, including yours, whether they're involved with parks, with walking, cycling, climate change, etc., anything like that. We want them to find out more about what they're doing and perhaps get involved. Yeah, so that's my final slide, as it were. These are the things we'd really love to get your help with. Healthy streets, so promoting our top 5 actions for the borough on healthy streets, and to Go Parks, where we want to help put the parks on the map, and also get involved with our Go Parks Airfield event.
Okay, Alice, so thank you for doing that presentation, and it makes it very clear the sort of campaign issues and the sort of concerns that you have. Well, let's go and ask you some questions now about some other areas as well. But first of all, you might want to tell us a bit about yourself and what made you interested in the environment and rural areas and urban development as well. Tell us a bit about your background.
I've just been interested in it for a very long time. I actually worked as a wine merchant for a long time in my 20s, but never really wanted to do that. I then went to do an internship actually in the European Commission, and then I joined a lottery distributor and was able to work on their environment programs, and got involved with waste management and recycling, and ended up doing a bit of a stretch in the government as a civil servant. Managed to survive 18 months before I had to leave, and worked on recycling policy, and then worked representing the local government environment sector for a very long time, which was fantastic. And I really I firmly believe that local government is kind of where things can change, and where we should be focusing our efforts, and not relying on government all the time. Local government is where it's at, I think, and where things can really change. And after that, I just ended up, campaigning, and this is my most recent campaign role, but I've been here for a long time. And I've always been interested in green spaces and parks in London. I am a Londoner. I've always lived here. And I've always felt that, if you grew up in London in the 70s, the two things that were really dreadful were parks and transport. And and so I've always had a strong interest in making them better.
Okay, so I mean that's interesting, and it's also interesting, really, about your interest in local government, and it's quite clear from your presentation earlier that is a focus that you have paid a lot of attention to. Some people would say, you're the campaign for rural England, and yet you're doing all this urban stuff. So how did that arise? Because that might sort of confuse people.
Yeah, well, I think it was a man called Harvey Sherlock, who was quite well known in the realm of urban regeneration, I think, and some time ago, that said that to save our countryside, we have to save our cities. And he just meant that, the relationship between saving countryside and cities is that you have to stop urban sprawl. And sprawl is a massive problem for so many reasons, and the key one is that it is a very high carbon way to live, if you want to put it that way. And the main reason for that is that you have to drive everywhere, and goods and services and everything has to move further because you are low density and you're not served well by public transport. And so it's really key that you create compact urban developments that work well, that work efficiently, that work on public transport, and that are nice places to live, where people want to live.
Yeah, I mean, some people would say I could understand getting involved in the urban area, in terms of green spaces and all the lovely green around London, but you've got really into the streets, haven't you? I mean, did you have was it a big job to persuade the Campaign for Rural England to get involved in the dirty streets of London rather than the green spaces, or did that come quite naturally?
Well, so we are CPRE London, so we are a charity in our own right, but a lot of the issues that apply to us do apply to many of the other branches. But for me, it was a really natural progression. So I saw that spaces were coming under threat. In particular, Greenbelt was coming under threat, and that was because of the government housing targets, largely. Sometimes it's for other reasons. Often it's because of schools being proposed for those sites. So the natural progression there was for me to say, well, you know, we don't need to build on those spaces. We don't need to build on Greenbelt. If you look around London, there is tons of space which is really poorly used, and often that is surface car park. And at the same time, of course, the Mayor's transport strategy is trying very hard to shift people away from car trips or unnecessary car trips towards walking, cycling and public transport. And so the two just go together well. I mean, though the links seem very clear to me, the links between spatial planning and transport are clear, very, very clear to me. And I think they need to be much clearer to everybody, really.
And is the, is the conflict between green spaces on one hand and the huge demand for housing, which is a main social problem, I mean, how do you resolve that in your own campaign? How do you work with local authorities to get the balance right? Because there has to be a balance, doesn't there?
Well, the first thing to say that I always say on this subject is that there are something like 250,000 outstanding planning applications for 250,000 residential units which haven't been built. So the problem is not that we don't have space, nor that we are not giving planning permission. We're giving planning permissions where we have space. We probably have space to keep going for 20 or 30 years. The problems are, one, that they're not being built, and two, that the government keeps piling on even bigger targets, despite them being unrealistic from the point of view of the fact that they're not being built, and also that it means that the council has to allocate even more space, even though those spaces will not be used. And so the council finds itself allocating tons of space which could otherwise be used more usefully, and potentially even allocating green space, which of course are the ones that tend to go first, because they're just easier to build on.
I mean, do you think both government, national and local, tend to formulate policy on the hoof? They do it because there's pressure on them, and so they don't think strategically in the future about what the right balance should be and what each can contribute to the national life?
I think there's no simple answer to that. I've thought very long and hard about the housing crisis. We need more homes, but that's not the only problem. In London, the problem is affordability. The problem is that we don't have enough homes which are at affordable rent, and we now have what they call the affordability umbrella, which means that a lot of what is affordable being built in the name of affordability is actually not to most people. So we have a number of problems in relation to housing, and I feel that the way that policy is formulated at national level is simply to say we must build more houses, and that doesn't, in my view, tackle the problem. It doesn't help by just creating higher and higher targets when they're not going to be built and when they are not going to be affordable. It is a very complex area, but I think the bottom line is that we don't need to create this idea that it is either green space or solving the housing crisis. That is a completely false proposition. We can have our green spaces, and to solve the housing crisis we need to do other things. We do need to build homes, but we need to do other things as well.
Okay. You've looked now at uh, green spaces. We've looked at the work you're doing in your previous presentation in terms of getting better streets and quieter streets and school streets. And, please people look at that if you want to find out more about what the campaign in the urban area is. But there's another issue as well, isn't there? I mean, around places like Enfield and Barnet and so on, there are a number of farms. And so does sustainable farming become a part of your campaign in the help to feed the urban environment?
I haven't campaigned heavily on that myself yet, but it's not something that I wouldn't want to campaign on. It's just that I don't have the bandwidth. I mean, I don't have time to do what I'm doing already. I think that the thing I would say is that green spaces often come under threat because they are left to do nothing or to become derelict. And so where that happens, particularly if it's close to the urban fringe, then those spaces become more likely to come under threat from development. So it is important that they are brought into use and used. And of course, yes, there are tons of things which could happen with them, which would be more useful than just leaving them doing nothing at all. Of course, I mean, you can use them to support management of rainfall. You can use them to improve biodiversity, wildlife habitats, or food and farming. Lots of things.
I mean, is the issue of biodiversity something that concerns you? I mean, it's becoming more and more important, and we listen to the programs of David Attenborough. We see that the future, the number of species are declining year on year on. Is that one of your major concerns as well?
Yeah, I mean, again, I wouldn't say it's. I'm not campaigning on it. It's not something I'm campaigning on, but it is part of the piece, isn't it? So if you want to save species, you have to save habitat, but you have to have good habitat as well. So we have to make sure that as we are planning our towns and cities, we don't lose our green space, but also we improve it to make it better for wildlife, for biodiversity, and so forth. So I think it's part of the piece, and certainly we do talk about biodiversity, and when we talk about improving green spaces, yes.
And you're also interested in the creation of growing trees and woodlands, aren't you? That's a part of your campaign as well.
Yeah, so more broadly, we work with lots of different groups. We work with the London Greenbelt Council, for instance, and of course we have the national CPRE who do lots of work around climate issues as well. So yeah, from the point of view of, I think there are a lot of people campaigning specifically around woodland, whether for its habitat value or its value in terms of climate. So again, I don't personally campaign heavily on that, but it's part of the piece. Part of the piece is about making sure our green spaces are not built on and are then improved and used more effectively.
Okay, so I mean, all of this in a way also relates to the issue of climate change, doesn't it? Because climate change is going to create huge movements of population. It's going to reduce the biodiversity we're facing, and we're going to need, in order to adapt to a world where food may be short, sustainable farming. And they're all things which relate to your organization. Is that why your organization has taken up climate change as one of its main goals that it will be pursuing in the next few years?
Well, yeah, I think that, we've always talked about, we've always been an environmental campaign, as well as, but coming at it from the point of view of the planning side of things, I suppose. So we CPRE talk about planning, and that's largely in the context of rural England, but it is fundamentally kind of rooted in our desire to see green space and beautiful countryside saved. Now, the climate emergency is something that everybody needs to respond to. So from that point of view, yes, of course, we need to respond. And so from London, we said, my response was to write a piece on Greenbelt as our climate safety belt. And I believe that very strongly is the case, because for the reasons that I've talked about, if you allow urban sprawl, you allow what is in effect high carbon development. And it's as simple as that. Of course, then all of the reasons for having green space, you can use to mitigate climate change as well. So used to manage water, used to try to take carbon out of the atmosphere and so forth. So there are obviously other things, but fundamentally, if you have urban sprawl, you have high carbon cities. What we want is low carbon cities.
Yeah, I mean, I noticed when I looked at your website itself, you were talking about 3 areas in climate change you were very concerned about. One was renewable energy, the other was zero waste, and you were opposed to fracking. I mean, are you involved in that at all, or is that something you feel strongly about?
So we are CPRE London. So you're talking about the national CPRE campaigns, and I'm not working on those campaigns, but obviously we support renewable energy. We don't talk about fracking particularly because it's not a big, it's not an issue for the London, our patch, I suppose. That doesn't mean that we're not supportive. And waste management is a massive issue for London. I mean, we're terrible. I mean, as I said, I used to work for a long time in waste management and recycling, and we could do a whole other seminar on that, and why it is that we don't do more on that. But in the context of CPRE London's campaigns, we're not campaigning on waste and recycling at the moment. Not that I wouldn't like to, because I would very much, but we just we only have so much time. We're very small. There's me. I work part-time, and my director who works part-time. That's it. That's why you guys in the local groups that we work with are so important to us, because you help us to campaign locally.
So does that mean in a way that you get involved in partnerships? You can't do it alone, you have to work with other groups. And how do you go about doing that?
Absolutely, and that is both London-wide and with local campaigns. So if we have if I have a piece of casework which might be to do with a big development, so for example, I'm just today working on the development, the Stag Brewery development in Mortlake in Richmond, where they are proposing far too many car parking places in our view. I work with local campaigners. Where there is a green space threatened, I really can't do much unless I'm working with local campaigners. So that's really, really important. Then London-wide, I work on two big coalitions, I suppose. One is the Healthy Streets one, which I've talked about, which is a coalition of the big London transport, sustainable transport and active travel and road safety campaigners. And then the other big coalition I put together is around parks, and that is mainly the London Friends of Green Spaces network ourselves, but also the London Environment Record Centre, which is called Giggle, and the London National Park City, and various others. So we're starting to work with local authorities as well. So yeah, I think because we're very small, I have taken the view that if we use the time that we have to create strategic coalitions, that is very good use of my time. I think that's why I do that.
So, I mean, in Enfield, for example, what are the groups you are working with at the moment, and who would you like to work with?
Well, we worked very closely with Enfield Road Watch and the Enfield Society around the development of the representations to the local plan. So that was great, and that's kind of ongoing, and we dip in and out of that as needed, having done the big project a couple of years ago and a big report. But we're looking to work with friends groups, park friends groups, and obviously many, as I said, have already helped us with Go Parks London, the map, and now we're looking for people to help us with helping set up some kind of event around discovering Enfield's parks. And then we're looking for anyone who's involved in either local road safety, pollution, sorry, I've been through it again. So carbon, so climate campaigners. We're looking for road safety campaigners. We're looking for healthy streets campaigners. We're looking for low air quality campaigners. So those campaigning against pollution. Anybody who's interested in kind of sorting out the traffic issues in Enfield. So yeah, we definitely want to hear from any of you.
So, I mean, once they contact you, I mean, what would you do with them? Would you set up local campaigns, local study groups, local actions? What would you do?
Yeah, so we will probably work with them to say what would they like to, what would they like to campaign on, what things are going on in their local area that matter to them, and then see, just see what help we can offer. So we've got lists and lists of campaigners around London, particularly on the healthy street side of things now, and we can. There are some campaigners out there who are creating all kinds of materials and resources that we can help and share with those people. We can put them in touch with other people so they might be able to help them. We've got tons of data that we can give them. We've got contacts in the council. We can help to get meetings in the council. So yeah, we really can help, and it makes a big difference if we're working with local campaigners. So yeah, I was pretty excited to hear about your coalition, Francis.
Well, it's not entirely my coalition, but it is a coalition now with actually we've got over 80 groups now, which is really
amazing.
Good. And I mean, is that sort of coalition something that you think is worthwhile and that you could easily work through?
I think coalitions are really incredibly important. They are really important, but what makes them work is if you have a set of clear messages. Sometimes with big coalitions, it's hard to nail down the 3 or 5 things that you want to happen. But I think if you can do that, then that's very powerful. And if you have everybody singing from the same hymn sheet and applying the same pressure, the only thing I would say is that those things need to be specific. So they should be practical and specific. So that's why we came up with our top 5 healthy streets things, because what we don't want is for people to, for example, campaign for a review or a report. What we want is people to say, no, we want low traffic neighbourhoods across the borough. We want 20-mile-per-hour speed limits across the borough. We want school streets for every school. Really specific things that if they are done will make a big difference overnight. And that won't cost the council, tons of money either. We chose things specifically which are affordable, which are not things that are preclusively expensive. So we would really love to work with Enfield campaigners to really kind of push on those things, in particular on the healthy street side. Yeah.
Well, it isn't the value of a coalition, though, like we've got, which is the Enfield Climate Change Action Forum. It's a network, and you may have 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, 5 points that you're concentrating on, but the other strength about it is that it brings people together to share information. It gives good practice where you can see it happening, and it allows people to join up with individual members. They don't have to do things as a total network. They find new people. So if they want to do something on, the development of the green belt, you will get those people together. You find new people and you get them together. You may not link up with the people who want to stop the incinerator. They will find other people and link up. Isn't the strength of a network that you can sort of let 1,000 flowers bloom as well as having specific points?
Absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, there are so many advantages to being, effectively networked up it's a way of kind of almost building your army, I suppose. You can achieve so much more collectively than individually, and yeah, that might be because you're more aware of what's happening. You can share information, you can talk to each other. Sometimes it's just a question of getting a bit of moral support, to be honest. And campaigning can be very hard, and you can get a lot of abusive flack, and that's not pleasant. So, having people to support you, even if it's retweeting your tweet, it is really important.
Okay. So if I mean, we're a network in NCAF, the Climate Forum, but you're a network as well. I mean, you've got a huge network behind you, nationally in London and hopefully locally as well. So if people wanted to get in touch with you, and obviously we'll make sure people in our own network in NCAF know about what you're doing and about this webinar, but if people wanted to get in touch with you, they wanted to engage with you and some of the activities you're doing, where would they go, and how would they go about doing that?
Well, I would just email me. So I'm very happy to take emails direct, and my email is pretty simple. It's just alice@cprelondon.org.uk. So hopefully you can put that up as well on the Facebook feed, and yeah, just very happy to be contacted. I mean, our website should have our contact details as well. That's a different address, but yeah, you feel free to contact me anytime, and I might put you in touch with some other people working on our projects, but yeah, anytime.
Okay, well, that's really great. So, I mean, thank you for doing this webinar and for your presentation as well, because I think that's really helpful. It will let people know what you're doing. And again, what you just said, the last thing you said is one of the great things about networks, whether they're yours, ours, anyone's, is they bring new contacts. They can put you in touch with different people. And that's so important because there's so many people doing great things and we don't always know about them all. And being able to find them is adding strength to the campaigns that we're doing. So, thank you very much for doing this webinar with us. And we'll turn this into a YouTube video and an audio only podcast as well, so that people can listen to that. So, thank you for joining us. And, hopefully we'll work together in the future in lots of different ways. So thank you. And we'll end this interview now.
Thank you.